My name is Sabina Magliocco, and I'm professor of anthropology at California State University, Northridge. Let's talk first about the origin of story and narrative. In my opinion, if we look for the origin of story and narrative, we have to look to the very beginnings of humanity, really, because I believe that story is connected with language. Humans developed a very sophisticated verbal language that gave them a tremendous evolutionary advantage over other similar life forms. And one of the reasons that they developed this language, or perhaps one of the effects of the development of this language, is that they could communicate with one another. Essentially, any form of communication is a kind of narrative, because you are conveying an experience. You're not living that experience at the moment that you're communicating it. You are communicating to other individuals, hey, this animal went over here. That's a narrative. This animal went over here tells people something that has happened. They haven't seen it, you've seen it, you're reporting it, but immediately that gives all of you an advantage because you know where that animal has gone and now you can plan to pursue it. Now, the purpose of story is to convey to others an experience that the narrator has had but that they have not had. So once again, it allows an experience to be shared with other people, and that's absolutely fundamental to the human experience and to the social experience. Obviously, narrative plays a huge role in folklore as well as in the study of folklore. The study of folklore began with the study of folk narratives. So if we look back to the end of the 1700s, the beginning of the 1800s, when people like the Brothers Grimm were collecting Kinder- und Hausmärchen, child and household tales, as they called the Grimm's fairy tales in the first edition, 1812. They were interested in these stories because they believed that these stories preserved some sort of essence of the German people that made them uniquely German. So the folkloristic interest in narrative as a genre goes back to the very beginnings of the discipline in the 1700s. Folktales play a very important role in the study of folklore, but they also play a very important role in human culture. I'm not convinced as the Grimms were, that tales preserve the essence of a people's soul simply because there are so many tales that occur in multiple variants across cultures. So for example, if you look at the Cinderella story, it is one of the most widespread tales in the world, occurring all over, probably originating in China, but occurring throughout Europe, North America, and now Latin America and Australasia as well. So we can't say the Cinderella story is an index of any one culture since it occurs cross-culturally. At the same time, what we do know is that each culture shapes these narratives in ways that are meaningful to them and that reflect aspects of that culture. The same tale in a different cultural context would not reflect. It would reflect aspects of someone else's culture. So narrators, individual narrators, shape these stories to reflect things that are important to them and their audiences. It seems that you're asking me whether we keep telling the same stories again and again. Yeah. And to a certain extent, we do. There are certain patterns in stories that folklorists have identified, and it's very clear that those patterns hit a note. They resonate with a particular culture or group of cultures, and so we often tell those stories again and again and again, although obviously we update them and there are new complications and there's different ways that they evolve. Take, for example, the Cinderella story. Again, one of the most widespread folk tales in the world, if not the most widespread folk tale in the world. Well, if you think about films, we tell that story again and again. There is a new film coming out now, a new version of Cinderella, which is, I think, coming out this spring. But even before that, if you look at a film like Pretty Woman, It's the same kind of story. It's an unassuming young woman that has a low status position who is discovered by a high status male, and that discovery leads to love and transformation and a new life for her. And there are many, many stories like that. There are many stories that are folktale-like in that the unassuming hero, the least promising brother, the smallest one, the one that no one thought would succeed, he's the one, or she's the one, that turns out to be the hero in the end. And these stories speak to very deep human needs. We all identify with the underdog. We all identify with the youngest, the smallest, the person in the unassuming position, the person who must overcome obstacles in order to triumph. And they promise a better ending, not always necessarily a happy ending with no problems at all, but they promise an amelioration of our situation. So these are very powerful stories, and we tend to tell them again and again. I think what's happening in modern society is clearly the advent of technology has hugely expanded the media in which our narratives are transmitted. So nowadays, our important cultural narratives come from film, they come from television, now they come from the internet and from outlets such as YouTube and Snapchat, where people can upload their own videos, and these narratives sometimes go viral if they hit a nerve with people. So what's happening is not that our narratives themselves are changing, it's that the medium through which the narrative is diffused have multiplied. I don't need to know you or participate in a face-to-face community with you in order to hear your narrative. I just need to turn on the television or go to the movies, or I can just go on YouTube or on Facebook, and those narratives reach me nonetheless. And narratives have a very important role in influencing and reflecting culture. They do both. Narratives reflect culture because, of course, they're coming out of your own cultural matrix. You cannot invent a narrative that promulgates somebody else's values and ideas because they're so deeply rooted in you and your culture that whatever narrative you come up with is going to more or less reflect that, even if you're trying to be different. On the other hand, especially when we get the narratives in the mass media, you have the potential of these narratives to influence an enormous group of people. When people lived only in face-to-face societies, you could only influence the people that you could see directly. But now, something goes viral and you're influencing millions of people with your narrative. So that's what's changed in terms of the impact of narrative in modern times. But we're still all telling stories.